The limb library gives you a wide range of dynamic limbs that respond to changes you make when you rig and when you animate, and they always look clean and consistent because they're built from shape layers. The limb library panel has two columns on the left and a preview section on the right. Limbs are organized alphabetically in the second column, but mostly you'll be sorting them by selecting the tags in the first column. As you check more tags, Limbo will refine the list down to the limbs that have all of them. When you click on a limb, you'll see a description and an image of how it looks, but do remember you can always change properties like colors, widths, outlines and so on with the controls that are on the pseudo effect on the limb layer, just like normal limbs. Now let's run through some of the tags so you can better understand what they mean. The limbs tagged utility are what we think are the most useful in a wide variety of characters. Visually, they're all pretty simple and they're often closely related to normal path and taper limbs, like inverted stroke taper here, which is just a path limb with the stroke that tapers wider instead of narrower. Tapered path is perfect for combining the splits, rounding and width controls of a taper limb with the curvature of a path limb, so long as the widths get smaller towards the end. If you need them to get bigger, just use tapered path reverse. Lower sleeve and upper sleeve are default tapers with controls to offset the widths of the clothing part from the skin part, so the silhouette is more defined. And they both have alternate versions with fake 3D rounding on the sleeves. Upper sleeve can always be used for shorts, as well as t-shirts of course. It's common for character designs to require limbs that are bendy, and that's why the curvature tag group is the biggest. Limbs with curvature are not made with two separate straight sections like a limb rigged with artwork. They're built from Bezier paths that can bend smoothly along the whole limb, like a path limb. You can always reduce the curvature property so that they look like two straight sections if you want to. If you find that the joint suddenly goes very pointy when curvature is 0, like this one, just leave curvature set to 1. Here in this comp I have an artwork layer of a watch, which I'll drag to the top of the layer stack, position where I want it over the wrist, and then select the limb layer along with it and click the Add Art button. That will embed it into the limb layer, but when I turn up the curvature value, you can see that the artwork doesn't follow the curve of the limb. So I'll undo to before I added the artwork. Instead, I'll add a locator to the limb, set the locator's position to where the artwork center is, and parent the art layer to the locator. Then, when I turn up curvature, you can see that the locator and the artwork follows the curve of the limb. Using a locator like this is usually the best way to add art to any limb that's curved. All of the library limbs were previewed on an M2 MacBook Air with 24 gigs of RAM. If the layer's frame render time was averaging under 10 milliseconds, they were tagged as fast. If it was over 40 milliseconds, they were tagged as slow, which I'm happy to say is a very small tag group. A lot of limbs ran ever so slightly slower than 10 milliseconds like host stack here, so don't assume that they're going to be significantly slower just because they don't have the fast tag. Limbs with the tapering tag have properties in their pseudo effect to vary their width along the limb. This is implemented in many different ways. With a limb like Ergola here, you can taper the entire limb, but only in one direction. With Thinline, you can taper the start and the end of the limb independently. With Finn's leg here, the tapering is limited to the lower part below the sleeve. These limbs are built from stroked paths, but strokes don't always look right when one end overlaps the other. Some limbs with the tapering tag are constructed more like normal taper limbs with no curvature. With a limb like Shorts and Socks 3D, you have the width sliders, familiar from normal taper limbs. And there are separate groups in the shape layer for the upper and lower sections, meaning that the overlap looks good, and you can reorder those groups if you need to. There's also some limbs with the tapering tag that are constructed like curved Bezier taper here. They have the 3 width sliders like a taper limb, but instead of the 2 rigid sections, there's a unique, expression-driven Bezier shape. The outline on limbs with this tag is usually a single color and a consistent width. To integrate this limb into my character here, I'll reposition the controllers, select the limb layer, and drag it to the bottom of the layer stack, then turn up the outline width of the limb so it matches the body. Then I'll parent the start controller to the body and the end controller to the master null. But this character has expressions on its stroke width properties to keep them at a constant width when it's scaled like this. If I want my limb to behave the same way, I need to enable the constant width checkbox in the pseudo effect. Most of the limbs with the outline tag have this option to keep a constant width when they're scaled. Limbs tagged with crease have a little line extending into the joint. Often you can keyframe whether the crease is fixed to the lower or the upper section, like simple crease here. Some limbs, like angled crease, have the line at an angle that's always halfway between the two sections. If a limb doesn't have a built-in crease, you can often just add one as artwork. Here I'll start with the bluey limb, reduce the curvature and change the width. Then I'll just draw a line with my pen tool and add it into the limb with the Add Art button, and hey presto. Limbs with the split tag will have 2 or more sections, usually with different colours. Some have one split that can be placed anywhere along the limb, like Faux 3D Path here. Sometimes the split's restricted to the upper or lower section, like this one called T-splaner. Others have 2 splits, usually one on each section, like a normal taper limb. And some have 3 splits, like quad color here. Sometimes a split limb has a continuous silhouette to the shape of the limb and the splits sit inside that, whereas on others, the sections can be made wider or narrower for a more defined silhouette. Splits often have the ability to show fake 3D perspective, and that's indicated by the tag rounding. Rounding can be done in different ways, some simple, some complex. You'll find limbs like Nothing Up My Sleeve and Tubuloso have sophisticated outlined sleeve cuffs, whilst there are also a lot of limbs that use the same simple rounding of default tapers, like Coloured Path here. We have a bunch of tags that denote something about the visual style of the limb. Gradient limbs have gradients. Hollow limbs have line work with a transparent inner. Stripe limbs have one or more lines running either along or across the limb. Cartoon limbs were inspired by classic film and TV animation styles, so they're suitable for rubber hose characters. Asymmetrical tag limbs have a feature on one side of the limb only. In some limbs, the asymmetrical feature will always be on the outside or the inside of the bend, like knee patch here. In other limbs, the asymmetry stays locked to the left or right side, regardless of which way the limb is pointing, like the highlight here on Fast Offset Path. Hand-foot limbs mostly have an added extremity at the end of the limb. Some of them, like hand and Jim's arm, are designed for you to replace it with your own artwork, but mostly it'll be fully integrated into the limb, like Path with Foot here, which has expression-rigged tangents on the foot, so you can keyframe its shape into an S or C curve when you need the foot to bend. You can also turn off the auto-rotation of the foot, just like a locator, so you can easily animate a walk cycle and keep the foot planted to the ground. The unique joint tag contains limbs that do something special around the joint, like skeleton on the left here, where the bulges are built from stroke waves, and swept elbow on the right, which has a curved yet pointy shape. Sequential is a tag for limbs that have elements that repeat along the length of the limb. Omnidroid and Worm are the ones to check out if you need regular stripes or subdivisions, but the most useful one to know about here is Xenomorph. Inside its limb layer are a series of shape groups that you can edit by hand or paste into. Here I want several shapes all the same, so I've deleted all but one, which I edit, and then duplicate it to make the copies. They'll automatically distribute and align themselves along the path of the limb, even when I change its stroke width and tapering. Xenomorph gets the advanced tag because it requires a rigging technique that's more complex than Limba's normal one-click process. Another example of an advanced limb is Path Warper here, which uses a non-rendering dummy Bezier path that you can edit in a straight vertical form, which then gets automatically distorted around the curved shape of the path limb. Now let's look at an example of how you can adapt library limbs to fit your own designs. I've already animated this character skipping, but if I solo the arm layer, you can see that the limbs are just regular path limbs with a second stroke added to give them an outline. I want something more interesting, so I'll open the limb library. I know I need something with outlines, so I'll check that tag, and rounding should work well with the 3/4 perspective of this animation. I'll also check the Crease Tag, which I think will look good with this design. Browsing through the limbs, I like the look of T-splaner, so I'll click OK and build it in the comp. I'll move the controllers so it sits next to the limb it's going to replace, and then select the limb layer and twirl down the groups in its pseudo effect. I'll dial up the outline width and sample the outline color from the comp, and then the other colors. The end width property will need to be smaller to match the size of my character's wrists, and I'll also adjust the other width properties to make the sleeve a bit wider whilst keeping the skin part fairly thin. I'll make some edits to this line around the sleeve cuff and it looks good. So I'll click Limber's copy button, select the destination limb in the comp panel, and then click Limber's paste button. To get rid of the redundant limb, I'll just select one of its layers and use Limber's select button to also select all the controllers, then hit delete. Previewing the animation, it looks great, but I think we should animate the perspective on the sleeve to match the movement. So let's come back to the first frame of the loop, select the limb layer, twirl down the split group and set a keyframe on the upper rounding property. I'll hit U to reveal that keyframe in the timeline. Then I'll head over to the last frame of the loop, set another keyframe, come back to the middle of the loop where the arm is facing backwards. I'll scrub the upper rounding property so that the sleeve is also facing away, like this. Then select all those keyframes, easy ease them, and preview again. Pretty good. So let's do the same thing on the back arm. Again, I'll click the copy button, select the destination limb, and click paste. When I hit U, I can see that Limber's also pasted my keyframes, but for this arm, they'll need to be inverted. So I'll select them, move them all back in the timeline, and copy and paste the middle one at the end, so that now the perspective on both sleeves always looks right. For the legs, I'll go back to the limb library and check the outline and rounding tags, but I won't bother with creases since the legs don't really fold up very much. Let's try tubuloso. I'll drag the controllers and reduce the curvature. Then I'll move the split slightly, and I think we're already looking pretty good. I'll hit copy, select the destination limb, and hit paste. Then I'll use Limber's select button to find all the layers for the old limb and delete them just like we did before. On the new limb, I'll tweak the rounding slightly and set a keyframe. Then copy, select the back leg layer and paste. Then hit U to reveal the keyframe and do the same for the front leg. On this first frame of the loop, the back leg needs its rounding to go the other way. Then we'll add keyframes at the end of the loop and come back to the middle, where both legs need the rounding inverted to match the perspective of the pose. Once they both look good, I'll select all those keyframes, easy ease them again with F9, and preview. So you can see how easy it is with the limb library to add, customize, and animate sophisticated limbs for your characters with just a few clicks. If you have a suggestion for a limb that you think we should add to the library, let me know in the comments down below and I'll see what I can do. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.